You don't seem to have even the guts to do that. If you say you believe in equal opportunity, you're a hypocrite. This college is privileged.
In today's video, we're going to watch Dinesh D'Souza debate a woke university student on the topic of reparations in America. Now, it's obviously the case historically that there's been things like sexism. It's obviously the case historically that there's been some homophobia and racism. But in today's Western culture in 2024, do we live in a racist society? I don't think so. Let's watch the video and I'll give you my thoughts on the back end.
After World War II, the white middle class soared to prosperity as a result of bills like the GI Bill. And African Americans who were coming home from war didn't get those benefits simply because they were African American. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs denied African Americans access to those benefits simply because of their race. And you are correct in saying that no one today dealt with that particular issue. With that being said, however, there was wealth amassed as a result of those programs that still exists today. And when I think of your example about an individual who works as a janitor and sees people dining in a beautiful cafe walking home from work, I want to ask you, do you think any of that indignation, given certain circumstances, might actually be justified simply because there have been systematic blocks in people's way throughout American history, not ending with slavery, not ending with the Jim Crow laws, not ending, some would say even today, we still have housing discrimination, all of which is to say, you found that during the Cold War era, there was a massive boom in the white middle class's prosperity, and you just didn't have that among African Americans, not because they weren't meritorious, but because they were discriminated against.
So, let me ask, you know, we're in a very smart college. It's worth pursuing a discussion on these points. So there are Americans whose present benefits are due to past advantage. By the way, this past advantage, which is often assumed to continue with the white man, actually goes all the way back to the beginning. The American Indians who were here first, right, had a huge advantage. We presume that they owned the whole country. Now, by the way, let's pause for a moment. How do you get to own a country? If you have Cain and Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer, and Cain says, okay, I'm not going to put a fence around the whole world. I own it because I'm the only guy here. You're a shepherd. And my descendants will now inherit the earth, and anybody who shows up is a usurper. Rousseau says that the first guy who puts up a fence and claims he owns something is a con man. So the American Indians came. They happened to be first. They came in a bunch of tribes. The Navajos who got the land took it from the Hopi or the Pueblo. Their law of the jungle was conquest. That's how they got the land. There's a big fight about the Black Hills that I cover in the film. The Sioux who got the Black Hills took it from the Cheyenne. So when we say, oh, give us the land back, are you going to turn around and give it back to the Cheyenne? Oh, no. It's ours. Really? How come you own it forever now? So what I'm getting at here is history is very complicated. Let me give you an example of India so we can look at this at the level of theory. Okay? India was invaded by the British, and earlier by the Afghans, and the Persians, and the Mongols. So you have all these successive invasions.
I think it would be a defamatory generalization about our current society, and pick a country, right? Could be England, could be Canada, could be the United States, where most of the people watch my content, to say that we live in racist cultures. Just like we don't live in a patriarchal culture, or a sexist culture, or a rape culture, any other type of these cultures that the left tries to claim that we live in. These words, racist culture, patriarchal culture, just get thrown around, and it's not to say that there isn't any sexism or like homophobia or racism in society, but society as a whole is not racist. Now, there are individuals, for instance, who may have had unpleasant views, unpleasant experience, anecdotal things that have happened to them, but you can't extrapolate that out and look at it as something that a whole culture is meant to suffer from, that this is supposed to be a defining issue of our culture today. We always look at our country so negatively. For instance, we never say like, wow, we live in a country that, I don't know, for instance, provides welfare to people who are not able to look after themselves. No, we don't do that. we say, well, we live in a racist country. Back to the video.
Right? Are you actually saying that you believe in a rule of social justice today that says globally, let's look at this as a global rule of justice, I'm going to figure out whose ancestors did what to whom, and I'm going to return goods that were illicitly taken from the beginning to the people who had it originally? Do you believe that that's a viable way to organize our society? Do you believe, if I can ask you a direct question, that you are the beneficiary of white privilege here at Amherst?
I
Yes
do,
or no?
Well, yeah, and
Pause.
Okay.
If you are, can I ask you a further question?
Okay, yeah, but I don't just say it in a I don't say it in a self-flagellating and self-aggrandizing way.
Hold on. Okay, go on.
You know what? I really try not to. I'm simply saying that because you asked me. Really, I view the recognition of one's privilege as an impetus to change things. So I don't just say I have white privilege. I try to help those who have not benefited from such privilege.
How? Hold on. Let's pursue this for a moment. You say, this is actually very important because there's a psychology here, right?
Well, you see, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm really not trying to attack you. I'm not trying to be provocative. I just find that often, I think the essence of much of this discourse surrounds hypocrisy, and you're trying to demonstrate that I'm a hypocrite. I say I benefit from white privilege, yet I don't actually do anything. But I'm gonna backpedal and say that ultimately I think what the greatest vice is cruelty, and I don't want to be hypocritical. So to answer your question, I'll start in high school. Do people want to hear this, or do we?
Educated. Go ahead. Tell them. Let them know. Listen to you.
Look, let me say where I'm going with this, because I think you're.
All right. Well,
too bad.
all of which is to say, it's not like I picked anyone out to help based on the color of their skin, but I was a tutor for people who tended to be low income when I was in high school. I suppose that would be one direct answer to your question, because oftentimes disparate educational opportunities are grounded in disparate economic systems, or systems that produce disparate economic outcomes. So that's one way that I would combat it on an individual level.
All right. Here's what I'm getting with this, okay? One of the benefits of a good education of reading people like Nietzsche is you begin to understand how deep the human desire is for moral self-exculpation. Moral self-exculpation. Now, you say, and I didn't say this, you said this, I'm a beneficiary of illicit white privilege, okay?
Illicit?
Well, isn't all white privilege illicit? Is it deserved?
Well, in this current system, there is legality.
Illicit means immoral.
Okay. Then
immoral white privilege.
Yeah.
Okay. So then if I were to say to you, there are surely many deserving minorities who would like to come to Amherst but have the inherited disadvantage of American history. Therefore, since you are an acknowledged beneficiary of illicit privilege, would you be willing to step aside voluntarily, putting your own moral mouth where your self-proclaimed virtue is, and give your seat, not my seat. I realize you may be super generous with other people's advantages and favor affirmative action, so other white kids who apply to Amherst are turned away to open spaces for minorities. But I'm not talking about you acting out your virtue on them. I'm talking about you acting out your virtue on you. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to give up your illicit seat that you don't deserve here at Amherst to make room for a disadvantaged minority? Yes or no?
Okay, well, let me start here. I don't know how you got on the topic of affirmative action.
By following the logic of your...
No, I never said specifically that I think that race-based affirmative action is the best way to rectify the systems of injustice that...
Why don't you practice it by stepping out? And why don't you go to the registrar tomorrow and tell him you want to withdraw from Amherst?
Are you listening to what he just said to you? Get on.
Yeah.
I'm
listening.
Think about it.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean... Look, I'm only continuing to engage because you continue to engage with me, and I do want to hear other people's questions. But in response to that, again, what you're trying to demonstrate is that everyone's hypocritical. As someone once said, that we're all we're all dirty up to our arms, right? We're not all perfect. None of us is perfectly morally consistent. Now, I've said absolutely nothing about affirmative action. The fact is that I believe everyone in this room is hypocritical to some degree, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for a more just and equitable system entirely. There have been points in my life in which I have given up some of the privileges with which I have been endowed simply because I realized that it wasn't the right thing to do. At the same time, I think everyone needs to survive, and that we understand that we exist in an imperfect system, and that we have to conduct our business in such a way as to not only adhere to our moral standards, but to the standards imposed upon us by the system in which we live. And I think that we have to be generous to people in their efforts to not be hypocritical and to do their best, but I don't think that we should totally throw away the idea that we shouldn't have those standards at all.
I would submit today that it would be very, very hard for any fair-minded person, especially someone from another country, to look at Western society and claim that racism is endemic, or that sexism or misogyny or homophobia, transphobia, picophobia is endemic of our societies. When somebody interprets a whole society in that way, I think you then have to start separating that out. Like, are we talking about someone who is a critic, who is really trying to improve society? Or are we talking about some sort of ideologue or somebody who might be an enemy, somebody who might want to weaponize this for political gain, as we've seen in politics in 2020, all these, BLM, everything was being politicized for gain. I think to claim suffering because your ancestors suffered is unbelievably unwise. It's an unwise thing to open because I don't see where it gets closed. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'm interested in us always having a reasonable attitude towards ourselves today, as well as our past. You have to learn from the past. And if you take the view that, for instance, there are people today who suffer because of their gender, sex, sexual orientation, or race, and that they suffer because their ancestors suffered, for instance, you are engaging at this point in so many lies. And one of those lies would be that everybody who wasn't part of your group or the group of your ancestors is somehow part of the oppressor. So that today in 2024, an average white American person must in some way put up with some overcompensation the other way, when in actual fact, most of our ancestors, I know I can speak for myself, did not spend the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, one, maybe not even living in America, but two, they were barely scratching out a living. They died too young. They lived lives of horrible toil just to provide a little bit for their family. And it wasn't that they were these massive beneficiaries of some patriarchal, systematically racist society. Such an unfair interpretation of what our ancestors actually went through in countries like America, like Canada, like Britain. And one of my biggest issues with the whole thing is, who's doing the accounting on this? Seriously, who are the accountants for this reparation? The people who are trying to be the accountants are people who also want to be the beneficiaries of it. And that's not entirely by coincidence. Like, what if we, for instance, one day we said, okay, let's draw up a list of the most suffering people in history and find a way to compensate for it? Well, we might find, for instance, that at the top of the list, and I'm just going off the top of my head here, but that the Jews have suffered a lot. Maybe say, for example, the Jews have suffered more than anyone in history. Well, do we make a massive house-to-house money run, taking money to give it to the Jews because of their suffering that they've done in history? Where would it stop?
The core of the American system, this will actually answers your question directly, is that what do we do about the conquest ethic of the past? And here there are two options. One option is we establish equal rights under the law. That was the solution of the civil rights movement, that we have had race-based discrimination, we've had racial hierarchy. Let's stop. Let's treat people according to the color of this, according to the content of their character. Equal rights under the law. Equal rights under the law. The other option, which you're defending, is you could essentially call it, let's correct for history. Let's correct for history. Let's try to find out who are the people in possession of stolen goods, and let's return it. Now, the first thing I'm trying to say is this is a hugely controversial principle because it actually involves wrecking the freedom of a free society. You basically have to put it frankly, if we were to carry that out, go into people's homes and take their stuff. Take their furniture, take their cars. You don't seem to have even the guts to do that. You don't have the moral self-confidence to do it yourself. It may be, if I am advocating a rule of social justice and I'm advocating it for the whole society, before I persuade everybody else, let's say I'm a Christian and I believe everybody should give 10% of their wealth to help the poor. And I go, you know what? The Bible says this, the Bible says that, everybody should give 10% of their wealth to help the poor. And somebody says, Dinesh, are you giving 10% of your wealth? And I'm like, actually no, but I did do some tutoring. And you go, wait a minute, aren't you advocating, aren't you saying that there is a moral duty to do this? Why don't you do it? Before you convince us, you do it. And you're like, I don't think I should do it because society is extremely complex, and I don't think I should do it unless everybody else does it. No, either you believe in it and you do it. Once you've done it, you might impress us. And then you might convince the rest of us that our wealth is also ill-gotten. But you can't do it. And I'm not trying to indict everybody of hypocrisy, only you. Because you're the one who said, I'm the beneficiary of illicit privilege. So you're a really good starting point, because I'm asking, if you're in possession of stolen goods, why aren't you willing to return them? So that's why fundamentally I see your charity. You know, during the Civil War, there was a guy who goes, I'm very happy to give, I've given 3 cousins to the war and I'm ready to sacrifice my wife's brother. That's basically your ethics. You're willing to have social justice if other people pay, but you're not willing to pay. So that's the problem. And that's the problem with the progressivism that marches behind social justice while protecting its own privileges. You know how you said, we all have to survive. Really? You have to be at Amherst to survive? You don't have to be at Amherst to survive. You have to be at Amherst to benefit. You have to be at Amherst because you're getting opportunities at this college that many other people are not getting. So if you say you believe in equal opportunity, you're a hypocrite, because you are taking advantage of opportunities unavailable to others. But for you, this hypocrisy is fully justified because you are militating on behalf of the poor. But if you are against privilege, this college is privilege. So there's a glaring hypocrisy, and you will never turn your moral mirror on yourself to say, what am I doing about it? That's my point. For you, society should act before you do, to enforce your moral code. Let's take a couple more questions.
If you open this can of worms, it's not going to stop, because then you'll have other people say, well, my ancestors fought more for this country than yours did, so I deserve more of the liberties. And you say, well, that's insane. Nobody would ever do that. Well, think again. Look at where we are today on all these topics. We can't just keep looking at history as some sort of bank, right, where deposits have been made that have been kept from us, and at some point in our lifetime, we get to, like, cha-ching, pull this lever and get all this money. How many generations after the Holocaust would you allow people to claim that everything that went wrong in the Jewish community is a result of the Holocaust? I mean, is there some kind of term limit on this stuff? I would have thought so, but apparently these leftists don't. I talk about this stuff and people say, well, you're just bringing up this fringe argument. Really, I am not, because look at the 2020 election. Everybody on the Democratic side was willing to talk about this a little bit. Some were much more eager than others, but they wanted America to go through this entirely self-destructive exercise. This reparations stuff, it's no longer about a wealth transfer from one group of people who did something wrong to another group of people who were wrong. It would have been that maybe, say, 200 years ago. Today, though, it is not. It's not even the descendants of the people who did something wrong giving the money to the people who were descendants of the people who were wronged. It is a wealth transfer, what they're asking for, of people who look like the people who did something wrong in the past to another group of people who resemble the people that were wronged. And that's impossible to do. Let's be completely clear about this. There is no way in which you can organize such a transfer of wealth on a moral or practical reasons. Even if you did believe that reparations were due, how do you go about it? America is filled with people who have the same skin color as me, for example, like white people, for instance, who have no connection to the slave trade and should not be made to pay any money to people who might have connection. Let's say, for example, that I was perfectly open to the possibility that there were residual inequities that exist in American life, that the consequences of slavery could be one of the factors that this resulted from. The thing is, I don't think it would ever be just one single issue. This would be a multi-dimensional issue, something like black underachievement in America. It's obviously a multi-dimensional issue. The left will try to make you believe that it's only about racism, but yet they can't tell you why Asians who arrived recently don't, for instance, be held down by white supremacy. And I'm saying white supremacy here in quotation marks, obviously. They don't get held back by it. They flourish more than any other culture in the West. Asians and like Indians from India have higher household earnings than white Americans. So I don't think it's racism because the evidence is not there. That is not why blacks are underachieving in America. This is a multi-dimensional issue. On this channel, we talk a lot about fatherless homes, which are a big issue, breaking up the nuclear family, incentivizing women to leave the household to get divorced. These are all long-term consequences of it, but at the end of the day, it's being awful generous to people because you have the ability as a human to make your own decisions. And by blaming fatherlessness, by blaming the family breakdown, by blaming racism, you are taking all accountability out of your decision making. If you make a bunch of great decisions in your life, one after the other, you have the opportunity to achieve massive success, generational wealth. But the opposite can be said too. You make a whole lot of bad decisions, for instance, you will suffer for that. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate every single one of you who clicks, watches, subscribes, comment. If you're still here at this point, please consider subscribing, leaving a thumbs up on the video. That really does help me out. Thank you all, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.